The next big battleground for the candidates is in the South. 500 delegates will be chosen there next Tuesday, and as Mary Nissenson reports, John Glenn must pick up a fair share of them.
Glenn came south battling the perception that there are only 2 Democrats left in the race, and he isn't one of them. He launched his first attack from the friendly turf of the Alabama legislature.
97.5% of the delegates to the Democratic National Convention are yet to be picked.
He's predicted he'll win in Alabama, saying he's the only alternative for conservatives and moderates, and that his philosophies and values come the closest to those of Southerners. But getting out the vote takes money and manpower. Glenn has only 8 paid workers in Alabama, 1/5 the Army he had in New Hampshire. His war chest for the entire South is roughly $250,000. Mondale will outspend him many times over. The farther he falls behind Hart and Mondale, the less attention he receives on network news programs, and that has put pressure on him to change his campaign style. The candidate who once shunned anything he thought smacked of a campaign stunt Saturday took to the air in a World War II biplane. But he did it in part because he simply loves flying, and it gave him a chance to feel some sense of triumph on what may well prove to be his final battleground. Mary Nissenson, NBC News, with the Glenn campaign in Pine Bluff, Arkansas.
A Canadian anti-nuclear group is going to court today.
Ozark was hit with a double whammy as a tornado plummeted without warning from the gloom of the early afternoon skies. Many stores at this shopping center were damaged. Part of the roof of Rose's collapsed under the weight of the rain and wind pressure. Would-be rescuers worked feverishly, tearing away the tons of rubble to get at any shopper or store employee underneath. Fortunately, none were trapped. A few miles away in downtown Ozark, some others weren't so lucky. This building on the square fell in, temporarily trapping several people. Carolyn Corson operates a plant shop just a few doors down. Even though she'd received no tornado warning, she says she knew something was about to happen.
I was standing here in the store, and it was raining and getting dark, and I got a little scared, so I went next door to Betty's. And I could hear the noise coming, and I grabbed Nancy and threw her down on the floor. She was Betty's daughter next door, and threw her down on the floor, and I knew it was a tornado, and the whole building blew apart.
Were you trapped in it?
No. There were 6 of us on this side of the store. There's 2 sections, and there were 6 of us on this side, and we were all okay, but there were 2 trapped on the other side.
What do you know about them?
Nothing, except it took them about half hour to get them out, but they did take them to the hospital.
How long did it last? Just there, here, and gone?
Seconds. You know, it didn't last more than 5 seconds. It just hit, and the building blew apart, and it was over.
Within an hour, the tornado work crews were well on the way to cleaning debris from the streets and repairing disrupted utility services. Dennis Latham, WSFA TV News, Ozark.
Right now, let's go live to Ozark, Alabama, where reporter Chris Grimshaw is the very latest on the cleanup after the twister. Chris?
Bob, the work crews have been working all through the afternoon in a continuous drizzle, and it is still drizzling now, raining as a matter of fact. There have already been a great deal of efforts made toward securing the stores, including putting up new windows in some of the stores, boarding up some of the others, and providing security. And that's one of the points that we'd like to talk to Ozark Mayor Mr. Blackman about. What is the prime concern about security this evening?
Of course, Chris, our prime concern is to provide security to the stores that have been damaged and the roofs are in. We have 2 stores that's been completely demolished. We will provide adequate security throughout the night and for long as necessary to ensure against any looting or any other type of crime that might be conducted in this area.
Everyone says they were completely surprised by the tornado, and without any forewarning, the injuries were relatively minor considering the damage.
We were very fortunate in this respect that we have 5 injuries that we know of a minor nature. We had some 10 to 12 persons who did ask for treatment at Dale County Hospital, but to our knowledge, only 5 have been injured. We think we're very fortunate that we had no fatalities in this very tragic situation in our community this afternoon.
Every community has a disaster plan, but it's not often it gets to implement it under real circumstances. How did you react? How was the city's reaction?
Well, I thought that the people within the city of Ozark reacted in a very calm and cool manner. We want to commend the citizens for the way they cooperate and worked with us during the cleanup stage and during the time that we assessed the damage and tried to assess the number of injuries that we had considerable help from other municipalities in our area, from the state of Alabama, certainly our Fort Rucker friends, and we had help from the citizens in Ozark. One contractor came in and helped us clean the debris, and at the present time we feel like we're in excellent condition as far as controlling the situation.
Thank you, Mayor Blackman, mayor from the city of Ozark. And as he said, there were a number of people who reacted in a calm manner in this tornado, and that was the reaction we got from store owners and others who said that as soon as they felt there was a serious situation, everybody obeyed the rules of a disaster, and that's to get down, act calm, and to look out for one another. Bob?
Thanks a lot. Chris Grimshaw live in Ozark, Alabama. But where did this weather system come from, and what caused that tornado? Rich Thomas is standing by with an answer.
Bob, those thunderstorms developed out ahead of a strong cold front moving through Alabama. Here's a county map showing the 3 touchdowns at 12:56 right around the Dale County, Coffee County line, and around 101, 2 quick sightings and touchdowns in the Ozark area. Now, radar at that time was showing some very heavy thunderstorms in the area, but nothing unusual, nothing that would indicate a tornado. And very often with these mini tornadoes, they will come out of the cloud, do their damage, go back up in the cloud before a warning can even be issued. Incidentally, regarding the severe weather in South Alabama, a quick look now at TV 12's color radar. Still raining in South Alabama right now, but there is no indication of any severe weather in South Alabama, and that is good news. That has moved to the east into Georgia now. More on today's weather coming up later on in this newscast. Bob?
Thanks a lot, Rich Thomas. The news continues with the story.
Looting is the primary concern in Ozark tonight. Police are patrolling the shopping mall and downtown areas where stores were ripped open this afternoon. The tornado sprang out of a slow-moving weather system recorded here on radar this afternoon.
The weather conditions were such that the tornado was here and on us in Ozark virtually with no warning whatsoever.
The tornado glazed off a southwestern neighborhood before hitting the Martindale Shopping Plaza, where it left a huge hole in the roof of the Rose's department store. Rescuers worked feverishly, concerned that there might be someone trapped. Fortunately, there wasn't. The tornado then sailed toward downtown, where it hit Betty's bookstore.
It didn't last more than 5 seconds. It just hit and the building blew apart and it was over. And I knew it was a tornado, and the whole building blew apart.
Were you trapped in it?
No. There were 6 of us on this side of the store. There's 2 sections. And there were 6 of us on this side, and we were all okay, but there were 2 trapped on the other side.
2 people were trapped under the fallen roof, but the worst injury was a broken left leg. In all, 12 people were taken to the Dale County Hospital. Only the patient with a broken leg was admitted. The others were treated and released.
We were just very fortunate in that respect that we just did not have any serious injuries or fatalities.
This Monday afternoon broke the Ozark routine and gave its residents something to talk about this week. Chris Grimshaw, WSFA TV News in Ozark.
New York City, there is no such source for us to draw. But we have a number of different initiatives going in order to accomplish that, but the real key areas for us would be there are 5,000 young men who turn 18 every day. And because of the fact that awareness is a constant problem, and we are dealing with a group structure within the society that is prone to procrastination and has some other higher priorities, it's important to keep before them the necessity, not only from the standpoint of making a contribution to the nation's readiness, but from the standpoint of complying with the law. We say in there, in bold, we thought liaison visit with him would be productive, and we have had that visit. And I think that was issued by Mr. Weinberger's office, that not only are
the government is trying to prove that as many as 75 to 100 inmates were systematically beaten under Joe Oliver's administration. The government says the alleged beatings are part of a conspiracy between the former warden, his former deputy warden, James Digman, and 2 assistants. The beatings supposedly took place from May through the fall of 1981.
All 4 prison officials were dismissed later that year. Assistant U.S. Attorney David Allred today described the alleged beatings as a cancer, which started with slapping so-called problem inmates and grew until inmates were held against their will, kicked, and hit with a rubber hose. A defense attorney for the four men, Frank Wilson, opened his case by describing the environment at Draper. He called it a whole different world behind gates and fences. Wilson says the four defendants were men who had a tough job to do, men who were sometimes called on to use force to maintain order and protect themselves. A jury of 8 women and 6 men will be sequestered during the trial, which is expected to last at least a week. Susan Silvernail, WSFA TV News.
Hey, Ween.
This is a great moment for Carver High School because we're one of the few teams to duplicate our efforts, being state champions back-to-back in basketball.
Oh, I was asking him. I asked him, was he going to be in school next year? Because I know he's considering hardship, and I asked him what he's going to go.
Did he ask you?
Yes.
What'd you tell him?
I can't tell you that now. No, we just having a good time. We was talking about whether he's going to go state, and he said he didn't know what he was going to do, and I told him I didn't know either.
Charles, if it turns out this is your last one, is this going to be one to remember?
Yes, sir. I think everybody played well today, and the seniors did a great job, and we couldn't have did it without their leadership.
Have you ever done that reverse dunk in a game before?
Oh, no, sir. I got luck on that one. Gerald just gave me a great pass, and I said, well, we were 4 enough ahead. If I missed it, I wasn't going to worry about it. We were 4 enough ahead. It was just a great pass.
You don't mind television at all?
Oh, no. I definitely don't.
I don't know. I don't know how that works, you know, how they think about that. I don't know if they take these records of these people that went to Anchorage, Alaska, or Honolulu, and the people that play one tough game in their conference and then play a Division III team the next game. I don't know how they go about that. But if they go against playing hard, tough opponents every night out and playing 9 out of the first 11 on the road and winning and losing your best player during the season for a stretch of 7 or 8 games, yes, we ought to go.
Seriously, I was asked to come down here, which I appreciate very much. The bank has to sit back and watch its customer base erode and go to these competitors, which we used to call non-banks. So let's kind of get the record straight. We really aren't talking about banking, we're talking about financial services, aren't we? So we ought to be calling ourselves financial service organizations if we are going to compete with these national competitors that are doing business right now in our backyard. And we no longer have an exclusive franchise.
Outrun that bear. And this fellow looked at him, he said, "Fella, the only thing I've got to outrun is you." A man who has been to Alabama banking, what Bear Bryant and Shug Jordan have been.
Very high attribute there in your comparisons to Barry. Since I was the only clean one in the crowd, I get the opportunity to present the speaker. So I will introduce.
Just a second. Now you did it. We got it good.
Go ahead and go. Got away. Yes.
My mom don't never let me go. This is our fun. I know.
Is happening in the future.
Well, if you put it on a graph, the cost of living is almost a gradual rise. But that line showing the cost of living is here on your graph. The hospital cost is going up like a steep hill. Well, we're trying to be realistic about it. We're willing to work with the Hospital Association. The fact is, they've been to my house this morning, proposing to set up an interview where we can talk about it. They have problems. We can help them with those, but also we need to work with them. And they need to work with us to hold down these costs. Now,
Looks as though he might have came in and hit some trees. We do have some information that tells us that he was on a NDB approach and he was lost on radar about a mile from the airport. He was attempting a landing.
A former Draper guard says Warden Joe Oliver told him he had to get his hands dirty. James Gray testified Oliver was telling him to get involved in the beating of inmates. Gray says he had seen inmates slapped in his supervisor's office. He said he was afraid he might lose his promotion, so in the summer of 1981, he says he hit an inmate. Sometimes Gray says he would help hold down a prisoner while his supervisors hit the man. Under cross-examination, it was learned that, like other key men who used to work for Warden Oliver and have testified about the beatings, Gray has pled guilty to a misdemeanor charge, but has not yet been sentenced. Federal prosecutors say Warden Oliver, Deputy Warden James Digman, a dog warden, and a captain of the guard conspired to beat as many as 75 to 100 inmates and pressured other guards to get involved. The defense says the prison officials sometimes had to use force as part of their job. And the defense has asked the jury to consider what each witness has to gain by testifying. Susan Silvernail, WSFA TV News.
Good morning, sir.
What's going on, Vic?
The setting for this grand inquisition was today's meeting of the Montgomery Kiwanis Club, who warmed things up with a perfectly lousy rendition of Take Me Out to the Ball Game. Baseball men were there, including Tom Rebel Oliver of the Red Sox, who played against the Babe that year. 2 eyewitnesses to the famous home run, Eddie Slugger Wells, a Yankee pitcher, and the Babe's roommate, and Ben Scrappy Chapman, a great player for the Yankees who labored in the shadow of Ruth and Gehrig, who later managed the Phillies to the World Series. First to testify, Slugger Wells.
I can still see Babe pointing out to that darn center field pole out there. Now, I know he's pointed at Rook or who, the pitcher, but anyway, he pointed out that way. And calling about the ball and stepped out and this and that. And doggone if he didn't hit the home run, see? Well, the Cubs have been all out on the bench riding terribly, but that quieted them up. But anyway, Chappie, when this thing was all over, Slugger, why, after the game, Babe was dressing beside me in the locker. And he started crying. And Joe McCullough said, Babe, what in the name of sense are you crying about? Joe, he says, I've never been so happy in my life calling that home run shot.
Ben Chapman remembers it differently.
The Babe pointed. Yes, he pointed. Right at Root. The next pitch he hit right into the center field seats. Yes, so far you're right. He crossed, went around third base, and they did a little heckling back and forth between the Cubs and the Babe. And he came in, and Gehrig was the next hitter, Dickey was the next hitter, and I was the next swinger. He walked by, and somebody in that group said, Babe, did you call your shot? He says, no, but I called that route every S.O.B. I could think of. Now, if you knew Ruth, you know I'm right. He went in the clubhouse after the game. Babe was a slow thinker. And after the game, he went in the clubhouse, and he began to say, boy, that's a good story. So somebody said, Babe, did you call your shot? He says, sure, I called my shot. Well, you couldn't blame him. After all, he was Mr. Baseball.
So there, one says he called his shot, the other says he called it after the fact. The controversy lives on.
We just believe that the American people have the right to exercise their privilege of prayer in public schools if they want to, that it should not be denied because of a Supreme Court ruling. The constitutional amendment that we proposed has lain dormant in the Judiciary Committee for over 10 years. They haven't had one day of hearings. And the Democratic leadership in the House of Representatives is thwarting our right to have legislation brought up and presented. And so we're trying to call attention of the country to what the Democratic leadership is doing. And they are actually debating it in the Senate, and we want the right to have our bill brought out and debated on the House floor.
That is fabulous.
That's my favorite so far.
Absolutely. This is my winner for next year.
And they have a Ferris wheel and the old lighthouse from the beach right in the middle of the float. Very well done.
For a moment, I thought that those were beer boxes on a conveyor belt.
That's a great job.
Didn't realize immediately that was the Zephyr. It almost
is we're getting, look at that lady with her load of trinkets from Carnival. Here now another float in the Elks crew of Orleanians. Taking our ears with it.
And they're back, and
look
they
at this
absolutely
little one,
refuse to touch it.
bundled against the wind.
This look like, no. If anyone walks away from Mardi Gras Day without a bead or a...
This was not just another ball game for the Alabama Christian Eagles. The winner here today advances to the National Christian College Tournament next week. Showing no signs of playoff pressure, the fast-breaking Eagles ran up a 40-21 halftime lead. Senior guard Mike Jones, making his final home appearance, poured in 12 of his 26 points in the first half. Darren Golson added 10 in the first half. Golson dunked not only the ball, but Clearwater's Charles Brown as well here in the second half, as Alabama Christian upped its lead to 31 points. But listening to Coach Jim Naylor, you'd think they were behind by that many. Naylor yanked all but Jones with 9 minutes left in the game. The senior hit nothing but the net here to break a 10-year school record for most points in one season.
And I knew, I figured I was 24 points away from the title, It was kind of hard to get it, but I hung in there.
Naylor answered cries from the crowd and inserted freshman walk-on Brent Mossholder. The crowd favorite came up with a block shot, 2 points, and an almost basket. It's on to Chattanooga now in the national tournament for Alabama Christian. Their first-round opponent could be Tennessee Temple, the top-ranked team in the country. Some thoughts on that tonight at 10 o'clock. Dave Cody, WSFA TV Sports.
Not real talented, but a very hard-playing team. They played UT Chattanooga to a 12-point game. That's the only game they've lost, so we'll have our work cut out for us.
So you can get to enjoy this one a couple of days.
Yes, most definitely.
President, good to see you. How are you? Good morning. How are you? Good morning. Have a nice day. Need your help next Tuesday. Very hard. Good to see you. How are you? Howdy. Good to see you. Fine. Good morning. How are you? Very hard. Good to see you. Good morning. Very hard.
Back to the bargaining table, and if that is a pro-arms control, because I think there's something more profound than just whether you're for or against school prayer. We are going to be treated, if you want to call it that, throughout the remainder of this year to a concerted effort by Ronald Reagan and this administration to the politics of distraction. This administration is going to do its dead-level best from now on to raise divisive social issues like school prayer, abortion, gun control, and a lot of things that a lot of Americans want to put behind them in order to distract the people of this country from addressing $200 billion Reagan deficits, a destructive imbalance in our trade, declining factories and manufacturing capabilities, more people out of work today than when Ronald Reagan took office, and the failure of economic and foreign policies. The unnecessary loss of 300 young American lives in Lebanon.
A relatively small group of Mondale supporters waited at Court Square in downtown Montgomery, but for the most part all they saw were the backs of a huge throng of reporters who were following the candidate's campaign through the state. After some handshaking and a one-block walk up Dexter Avenue's business district, Mr. Mondale's motorcade drove another 2 blocks to the King Memorial Church for a private meeting with black leaders. primarily Joe Reed and other members of the Alabama Democratic Conference, which endorsed Mondale last December. Joe Reed called it simply a meeting to further discuss the issues of the campaign. The next stop was Governor Wallace's office for another closed-door meeting, and a few moments later with the photographers, but no endorsement from Mr. Wallace, as has been the case with each of the Democrats who've come to call. Next, it was a joint session of the state legislature and a lengthy but polite introduction by Lieutenant Governor Bill Baxley, who's also the state campaign coordinator for John Glenn. Then Mr. Mondale talked issues, including what he called the devastation of the Reagan administration's budget deficits.
And one of the reasons that unemployment in Alabama is still almost 13%, and while rural areas are suffering so much, and while many industries that were doing well a few years ago, and areas like the broiler industry and so on we used to dominate the world, is that the effect of Reaganomics is like an enormous tax that has driven the competitive advantage away from Alabama and from the exporters of our country. The ability to stay out front, to grow in international trade, to outcompete. I really like that mayor. He's growing on me. To outcompete our...
Is this strictly state, the $1,000 is made up of the state savings city and a 1-cent county? Yes. It says total tax liability, or is it just the 4%? Okay, Jack. Had a good month in December. And it probably is good. Yeah, I think that's right. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I just want to call your attention. You still have to remember they've essentially transmitted the state money that they have collected and been allowed to hold for people.
I decided today, March 8, 1982. When we do adjourn, we reconvene at 9 a.m.
Mr. Mondale spent only a few minutes shaking hands along Dexter Avenue before moving up the street to a private meeting with local black leaders. Later at the Capitol, he spoke briefly with Governor Wallace, but to no one's surprise, the governor withheld any endorsement for Mr. Mondale or for any of the other Democrats in the race. The former vice president was then introduced to a joint session of the state legislature, where he made a rather short, to-the-point address emphasizing his idea of what this country needs in a president.
Look for a leader. Look for a president. Look for somebody who will fight on the side of the average American. Look for someone who will hurt when you hurt. Look with someone with the guts to stand up for our people and pick the best person. If you'll do that, I'm going to carry Alabama. Thank you very much.
Later, outside the Capitol, he talked about his meeting earlier in the day with black leaders and what he'd called a race that was between him and Gary Hart.
Was the reference to the two-man race in the context of Jackson?
In one sense. In other words, I think the race has come down to Senator Hart and myself. I was not denigrating other candidates at all, and as a matter of fact, didn't say anything to denigrate anyone, but that I needed their help to win this race for many reasons, including the cause of social justice and civil rights.
I'm Bob Howell, WSFA TV News, with the Walter Mondale campaign at the Capitol.
Good morning. How are you? Gary Hart. Good to see you. Good morning. Gary Hart.
Back to the bargaining table, and if that is a pro-arms control, because I think there's something more profound than just whether you're for or against school prayer. We are going to be treated, if you want to call it that, throughout the remainder of this year to a concerted effort by Ronald Reagan and this administration to the politics of distraction. This administration is going to do its dead level best from now on to raise divisive social issues like school prayer, abortion, gun control, and a lot of things that a lot of Americans want to put behind them in order to distract the people of this country from addressing $200 billion Reagan deficits, a destructive imbalance in our trade, declining factories and manufacturing capabilities, more people out of work today than when Ronald Reagan took office, and the failure of economic and foreign policies. The unnecessary loss of 300 young American lives in 11...
I had a good game up in Nashville. That was one of my best games because I like the Coliseum they play in.
You do? You like the floor? It's different and everything.
Yes, it is, but quite, for me, a freshman coming from high school, I'm used to playing in a background atmosphere, you know, and it seems like they have a background in the back of the rim, so it seems like it's home when I shoot.
If this team plays as well as we can and with intensity for 40 minutes, we can beat anybody.
Our guards are playing really well, and that's what we need to win. We have a pretty good inside team, and if we get our guards going, I think we can go in there and win this thing.
We're going in off of 2 good wins and an 18-win season, and everything's on the up and up.
Because your vote's going to be a throwaway. Well, we don't feel that way. We're going to be asking if he continues to show and he continues to improve with each primary. Coming into Super Tuesday, we think that just as Hart was able to catch fire in New Hampshire and Iowa and all these other, well, not in Iowa, but in New Hampshire, we'll catch fire here in the South. And the nation as a whole will take another look at it. Everybody's perceiving a Mondale-Hart race for the nomination. We're not looking at it that way.
At the Jackson campaign headquarters in Montgomery, campaign workers held a news conference to answer, among other things, questions about federal matching funds for their candidate. Reverend Jackson is in danger of losing those funds because of his weak showings in the New Hampshire and Vermont primaries, where he failed to draw enough votes to keep drawing federal money.
That is really not an issue.
But campaign workers here are downplaying the importance of all that. They say on Super Tuesday, Reverend Jackson will have no trouble drawing 20% of the votes in at least one state. That's what he'll need to keep the federal money coming.
We'll get 20% of the vote in Alabama. We'll probably get 20% of the vote in other primaries also. But in Alabama, we'll get more than 20% of the vote.
Campaign workers admit it's no secret Jesse Jackson is running on considerably less money than most other candidates. But that's not the biggest of their worries. Reverend Jackson's supporters are clearly concerned about the number of black community and government leaders who are backing Walter Mondale.
When they endorse Mondale, yes, it's an endorsement against Jackson's candidacy. If they're not for him, then you got to be against him.
So for now, in Alabama, the Jackson campaign is relying more heavily than ever before on the grassroots support they've cultivated, hoping it will help not only at the polls, but also in paying the bills. Tom Foreman, WSFA TV News.
If he continues to show and he continues to improve with each primary, coming into Super Tuesday, we think that just as Hart was able to catch fire in New Hampshire and Iowa and all these other, well, not in Iowa, but in New Hampshire, we'll catch fire here in the South. And the nation as a whole will take another look at it. Everybody's perceiving a Mondale-Hart race for the nomination. We're not looking at it that way.
Let's go first down. Oh, move. Come on, man. There you go. Come on, man. 30. We got Joe.
The Crimson Tide rolled across its new artificial practice surface, marking the first official day of spring practice. Second-year coach Ray Perkins attributed the team's obvious enthusiasm to their successful bowl trip to El Paso just 3 short months ago.
So I think that makes the difference in an attitude of how you start the next year. I think we made that point talking about that game prior to the game.
Perkins' offensive depth chart resembles a classified section of the newspaper. There are job openings at quarterback, wide receiver, and in the offensive line. Sophomore Mike Shula will start the spring ahead of freshman Gene Newberry at quarterback.
The thing I got to do is be able to play within my abilities. I think if I can do that and compete with my abilities and just worry about myself, I think things will fall into place for me.
There will be no orientation period for Tide running backs, although Ricky Moore will spend the spring wearing a baseball uniform. Extra time will be spent on the kicking game as it was today. Greg Richardson will return kicks and vie for a wide receiver spot. Defense is a Tide strength. Perkins started as many as 5 freshmen on defense last year, and combined with the veterans, the Redwood Forest will undergo even more growth during the spring.
I think we lost 2 starters, Randy Edwards and Stan Gay. And, you know, I think we got some pretty good people behind them to, you know, come in and start.
I think we've got a chance, an opportunity to have a really fine defensive football team, and I think that's a big key for us.
Okay. Thank you, Coach.
Voters don't know very much about what's behind the new ideas and the new generation and the new leadership.
Well, I can hardly summarize. You know, I've been campaigning for president for a year and a half, articulating throughout the South and across this country the need to restructure this country's economic foundation, including our public works, including our manufacturing capability, including our trade and technology. I've talked about a new decade for environmental improvement, including eliminating toxic waste dumps by taxing polluters. I've talked about a foreign policy that emphasizes our diplomatic initiatives and not just our military intervention.
No, it's not.
Because if they don't protect mine and your way of life, then our life is in jeopardy. I believe in strength and power is deterrent to war. And this is life's issue that I'll touch on, and I'm for volunteer prayer in school. We must refer back to George Washington's farewell address to this nation. He said that our nation was founded by divine providence guidance. And he said the people of this nation must be led by that if we continue to be free people. And that is one of my goals, to see that every child has an opportunity to have volunteer prayer in school.
It was almost like old times for Senator John Glenn, but this time, instead of a fighter jet or a rocket, he was showing off his skills behind the wheel of a tank. But the real purpose of this visit to the Army National Guard training site near Fort Rucker was for the senator to demonstrate his knowledge of defense systems and to fire a few shots at his opponents in the upcoming Alabama Democratic primary.
Of all the candidates in this race, I am uniquely qualified by experience and commitment to set the defense policy of this country.
Senator Glenn was critical of Walter Mondale's ideas on defense, but he saved his biggest guns for Gary Hart.
Perhaps the single most important area where Gary and I disagree is on this philosophy that smaller is better, that simpler is better, that less complicated is better, and that because it's cheaper, it might even be better. Now, my criteria is a little bit different. Will it win in combat?
Senator Glenn says his concern about a strong defense for the country is doubly important for Alabama, since several industries in the state have big military contracts. Senator Glenn is counting on Alabama to help pull him out of his trailing position behind the front runners in this presidential race. He's calling the South something of a goal line stand. The question now, will he be able to crack the front-runners' defense on Super Tuesday? Tom Foreman, WSFA TV News.
Hi, how are you? Glad to see you, Senator. Pleasure. Glad to see you.
Senator John Glenn used an Army National Guard training site near Fort Rucker for a little target practice on Senator Gary Hart's defense policy.
Perhaps the single most important area where Gary and I disagree is on this philosophy that smaller is better, that simpler is better, that less complicated is better, and that because it's cheaper, it might even be better. Now, my criteria is a little bit different. Will it win in combat?
Does this mean he considers Senator Hart his biggest threat in the South?
As I said, I have some very major differences with regard to defense policy with Gary, and since he has come up and is a major factor now in the elections that will be held next Tuesday, I felt it was proper and right to spell out these differences.
Senator Glenn's visit was highlighted by a quick drive through the country in an M60 tank, a move to demonstrate his knowledge of defense systems. Senator Glenn is counting on Alabama to help pull him out of his trailing position behind the front runners in this presidential race. He's calling the South something of a goal line stand. The senator came out of his tank ride wearing a smile, the sort of smile he hopes he'll be wearing after Super Tuesday. Tom Foreman, WSFA TV News at Fort Rucker.
What was it like?
Somebody forgot to tell this crowd the political experts say Jesse Jackson can't win the presidency. To them, he's already a winner because he's still in the race, because he's a contender on Super Tuesday. Someone said Reverend Jackson was coming home last night, and if that was true, then Jackson was telling the home folks he's come back to collect on his dues.
I challenge any man running tonight. I've marched further, stood longer, faced more threats. I've earned your vote. I paid my dues. I paid my dues.
Now, after Walter Mondale's tumble in New England, Reverend Jackson is taking jabs at black leaders who chose Mondale over him, saying they needed to back a shoe-in. Jackson says the race for the Democratic nomination is wide open, and he says blacks are no strangers to long shots. Susan Silvernail, WSFA TV News.
Representative Roy Johnson of Tuscaloosa sponsored the resolution. It would require a hiring freeze, including replacing workers, set up a method for the governor to okay special hirings in what were called emergency situations, and let the legislature have the last say in okaying the governor's approvals.
So we ensure that we have done everything that's reasonable and necessary to safeguard the taxpayers' money, to ensure that when we do spend it, we spend it in the wisest possible manner.
I think that the Alabama Constitution clearly defines the duties and responsibilities of the executive branch and the legislative branch. And I think that the wording in Mr. Johnson's resolution intermingles these and confuses it somewhat.
Concerned the legislature might be overstepping its bounds, and sure the governor would do what he wanted to anyway, Mr. Starkey was successful in swapping his resolution, which only asked the governor to implement the moratorium. Meanwhile, the governor's office says the figures are misleading. Administration official Farrell Patrick says so many federal and local dollars are mixed into employee salaries that the actual savings to the state would be minimal.
The governor has no problem with issuing the executive order as long as we can staff new facilities and that we exempt those employees that are reimbursed by the federal government.
While many legislators voted for the resolution, some said privately that it's an effort by those legislators, who on the one hand have been busy raising taxes recently, can now on the other hand make a public cry that they are trying to cut costs. Chris Grimshaw, WSFA TV News at the Capitol.
In Rule 35, I was trying to find, there's another rule I have not found about recommitment yet, and I'm looking for it.
Does not have the microphone.
Now, some guests, Senator Teague's, some students from Coosa Valley Academy. I got 30 students and 5 adults. We're mighty glad to have you visiting with us.
Well, then I move third reading of the bill, and I don't ever recall withholding that motion.
Well, I'm going to let them
Mr.
talk.
President, I was recognized by the chair.
Mr. President, under the rules.
Now, we have no information relative to the amount of money that's going for non-merit system employees, the amount of money that's going for consultants of any nature. I'm talking about legal, engineering, environmental, psychological consulting. I don't have any idea how many tax dollars are being paid out in private contracts by the state of Alabama for consultants.
Gary Hart spoke of a new direction for the country.
This nation cannot afford to go backward in the late 1980s.
Signed autographs
We have 8 or 9.
and addressed a joint session of the state legislature.
I believe a constructive and creative government will put those unemployed people to work.
And through it all, he talked on one theme: time for a new leadership.
I believe 1984 is one of those watershed years where the decision before the American people is not simply whether to have a Democratic or a Republican president, whether to become more liberal or more conservative, but the issue is, are we going to move to this nation's future, or are we going to slip backward into our past? Not only this generation's future is at stake, but the future of our children and their children as well. Our nation, in my judgment, has not passed its prime, but too many of its past leaders have.
After his speech, Senator Hart went to the governor's mansion to meet privately with Governor Wallace. And later, while talking with reporters, the senator was asked if the governor had told him the secret to winning in Alabama.
By getting the most votes. That was exactly what he said.
But has been the case with every other candidate who's called on the governor, there was no endorsement. I'm Bob Howell, WSFA TV News, with the Hart campaign at the governor's mansion.
Sheriff Amerson from...
The Tigers shot 62% from the field in the first half when they opened up as much as a 7-point lead. Auburn's star, Charles Barkley, converted 2 alley-oop slam dunks, but it was Greg Turner who shined the most. He had 8 points by intermission. Another Turner, this one named Jeff, and wearing a Vanderbilt uniform, was unstoppable. The All-SEC forward scored 12 points in the first 20 minutes, but Auburn carried a 3-point lead into the dressing room. Phil Cox heated up with 18 points in the second half, but Auburn still managed an 8-point lead when Greg Turner made this miraculous tip-in. But Charles Barkley fouled out of the game with 7 minutes to go. Vanderbilt hung close. Chuck Person assumed the Tigers' scoring burden. This basket put them up by 3. But Vanderbilt countered with a basket. Phil Cox fouled Gerald White with 31 seconds left, and the freshman made both free throws, putting the Tigers up by 3 again. Cox answered, though, and Auburn turned it over. But McKinney's game-winning shot would not fall, and Auburn escaped by the narrowest of margins, 59-58.
We got away from the things we wanted to do in the second half, and we let them catch back up on us. But we stuck in there, Barkley fouled out, and we had to stick our guts out and lay it on the line, and we did.
Earlier today, Alabama advanced to tomorrow's semifinals. Buck Johnson scored 12 of his 19 points in the first half, but LSU's Derek Taylor hit this jump shot with 53 seconds left to send the game into overtime. That's when Eric Richardson stole an inbounds pass under his own hoop and laid it in with just 27 seconds left on the clock. Alabama won it 72-70 over LSU. In another thriller, Willie Burton, who had 24 points, hit a 6-footer to send Tennessee into overtime with Florida. And the Vols completed the upset as Tony White went to the charity line, finishing with 30 points. Tennessee won the game 80-74.
Because I think an All-American player is a special person, but I think Jesse Phillips is without a doubt deserving of consideration, and we hope that he'll get that opportunity to go to the Olympic trials. And I know this, I don't believe there's a player in any league in this country that can shoot it better.
I just would, it just is, I really just appreciate just having an invitation to go out and try, So if I don't make it, it would just be great just to try out.
Further solidifying our defensive football team would be number one on our list. And the second thing, on the offensive side of the ball, really cutting down our quarterback situation into a numbers where we can work with them better and get a lot of work to them. And to those 2, 3, or 4 people that have the best chance to be lining up against Boston College for us September the 8th, and really get a lot of work to them and pay a lot of attention to that position.
Coach, as far as the quarterback situation,
Less than 24 hours after Walter Mondale walked through this door, the Colorado senator was ushered into the same House chamber. His theme for the lawmakers, new leadership and a new direction for the country.
Where the decision before the American people is not simply whether to have a Democratic or a Republican president, whether to become more liberal or more conservative, but the issue is, are we going to move to this nation's future, or are we going to slip backward into our past? Not only this generation's future is at stake, but the future of our children and their children as well.
He called for a government of national unity, a reference to minorities and women, more support for the family farm, a restructuring of the foundation of our country's economy, and he talked about reducing our dependence on nuclear weapons for defense.
And I also think that part of that national security is to sharply reduce this nation's reliance on nuclear weapons. There is no security for this nation, for the world, or for future generations in an unlimited nuclear arms race. For the nation, what we can do is put this country back on a course of progress, of hope, of a future destiny which this nation has yet to realize. That can begin in this state and spread all across this country and spread all across the world. And I ask for your help, and with your help, I intend to be the next President of the United States. Thank you very much.
What do you think? How do you think it's going to do here? I think it's going to do beautifully himself, and I think it's fantastic. And I think it's folks like